Salem, Massachusetts. 1668. A ship captain builds a mansion on a hill overlooking the harbor. 7 gables pierce the sky like dark fingers. Inside, secret passages wind through the walls. Hidden staircases lead to nowhere. A well sits in the basement with water so deep no one has ever found the bottom. Within a year, whispers begin. The house is cursed. Within a decade, the family who built it starts to die in strange ways. Accidents. Sudden illnesses. Disappearances. Within a century, the mansion becomes the most haunted address in America, a place where colonial brutality, witch-trial paranoia, and family secrets merged into timber and stone. This is the House of 7 Gables. And this is its dark story. From the outside, it looks picturesque. A rambling wooden mansion, authentically colonial, perched above Salem Harbor. Tourists photograph it. School groups visit. It seems like harmless history. But the real story is something else entirely. A story about how one family's greed destroyed another family completely. How the Salem witch trials were manipulated by the wealthy to steal land. How a curse, real or imagined, followed generations through time. How hidden rooms in this house concealed evidence of crimes that were never prosecuted. And how the very structure of the building was designed to hide something that the family who built it never wanted found. The mansion made famous by Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel is real. But Hawthorne didn't invent the darkness. He only wrote down what had been whispered in Salem for 150 years. The question isn't whether the House of 7 Gables is haunted. The question is, what really happened here? And why does the truth keep getting buried? If you enjoy deep investigations into America's oldest and strangest houses, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which mansion we should explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Captain Who Wanted Everything. Salem, 1668. The town was barely 40 years old, but already it had become one of the wealthiest settlements in colonial America. The reason was simple: shipping. Salem's harbor was deep and protected. Ships could sail from here to the Caribbean, to Europe, to Africa. And the merchants who controlled those ships grew rich on a triangle of trade that we need to talk about honestly. Sugar from the Caribbean. Rum from New England. Slaves from Africa. Manufactured goods from Europe. This was the economic engine that built Salem. Not cod fishing, though that mattered. Not farming, though everyone farmed. The real money came from ships that carried human cargo across the Atlantic and returned with sugar, molasses, and bills of sale. Captain John Turner was one of those merchants. He wasn't the richest man in Salem, but he was close. His ships made regular runs to Barbados and back. His warehouses on the wharf stored barrels of molasses that would be distilled into rum. His ledgers recorded transactions that, by modern standards, documented crimes against humanity. But in 1668, this was simply business. Profitable, legal, socially acceptable business. Turner wanted a house that reflected his status. Something substantial. Something permanent. Something that would announce to everyone in Salem, "I have arrived, and my family will endure." He purchased land on a hillside overlooking Salem Harbor, Turner's Hill. It would be called for generations. The location was perfect. He could watch his ships come and go from his own windows. The elevation provided cooling breezes in summer and a position above the town's dirt and disorder. There was just one problem. Someone else wanted that land. Matthew Maule was a carpenter, a man of modest means who had settled on that same hillside years earlier. He had no formal deed. Land ownership in early colonial Massachusetts was often informal, based on occupation and cultivation rather than legal documentation. Maule had built a small house there. He had cleared fields. He had planted crops. By the customs of the time, the land was his. But customs didn't matter when a wealthy ship captain decided he wanted something. Turner went to the colonial authorities. He claimed the land was unoccupied, or that Maule's claim was invalid, or that he had purchased rights from an earlier grant. The exact legal argument is lost to history. What we know is this: the authorities sided with Turner. They always sided with men like Turner. Maule was ordered to leave. He refused. What happened next is documented in colonial court records, though the details are sparse and contradictory. Maule and Turner had a confrontation. Witnesses heard shouting. Some accounts mention violence. Maule allegedly struck Turner, or Turner's men forcibly removed Maule from the property. What's certain is that Maule lost his land. Turner took possession. Maule's house was torn down. And Maule, standing in the mud watching his home demolished, reportedly spoke words that would echo for centuries. God will give you blood to drink. It was a biblical phrase, a curse from Revelation. In Puritan New England, where everyone knew Scripture and believed in divine justice, these words carried weight. Turner laughed. Or so the story goes. He ordered his workers to break ground immediately. Within months, the foundation was laid. Within 2 years, the structure was rising, a massive wooden mansion, the largest private residence in Salem at the time. It would eventually have 7 gables, peaked sections of roof that gave the house its distinctive silhouette. Each gable represented a different part of the house: sleeping quarters, storage, servant spaces, and areas whose purpose remains unclear. The design was unusual even for the period. Colonial houses typically had simple peaked roofs. This sprawling asymmetric structure with multiple gables jutting at odd angles looked almost organic, like the house had grown rather than been built. Inside, the layout was even stranger. Narrow staircases spiraled up from unexpected corners. Small rooms connected to larger ones through doorways that seemed randomly placed. A well was dug in the basement, not unusual for the time, but this one went unusually deep. So deep that workers reportedly refused to descend to the bottom. Secret passages were built into the walls. One connected the basement to a hidden chamber behind a second-floor bedroom. Another ran from the attic to a concealed exit near the foundation. Why? The official explanation was practical. Secret passages allowed servants to move through the house without being seen. They provided escape routes in case of fire or attack, a real concern in an era when Native American raids still threatened colonial settlements. But some historians have darker theories. Smuggling. Salem merchants engaged in illegal trade to avoid British taxes. Secret spaces in homes allowed them to hide contraband. Slavery. Though Massachusetts would eventually move toward abolition, in the 1670s, slavery was legal and practiced. Secret spaces might have been holding areas for enslaved people brought through Salem before being sold elsewhere. Or perhaps Turner simply wanted privacy. Spaces where he could conduct business, count money, hide valuables, or engage in activities he preferred to keep from prying eyes. The house was completed around 1675. 7 gables. 3 stories. 17 rooms that anyone could see, and an unknown number hidden in the structure's bones. Captain John Turner moved in with his wife and children. He had achieved his ambition. He owned one of the finest houses in Massachusetts. Matthew Maule was dead by then. The exact date and cause of his death are unrecorded. He simply disappears from colonial records. But his curse remained. And within a generation, Turner's family would begin to understand what "God will give you blood to drink" actually meant. Chapter 2: The Witch Trials and the Truth Nobody Tells. Salem, 1692. 24 years after Turner built his mansion, Salem exploded into madness. The Salem witch trials are taught in every American history class. The basic story is familiar. Teenage girls claimed they were bewitched. Accusations spread. Paranoia consumed the town. 19 people were hanged. 1 man was pressed to death under stones. Dozens more were imprisoned. What's rarely taught is this: the witch trials were fundamentally about property. Not entirely. Real religious hysteria played a role. Genuine fear of the devil existed. Personal grudges, social tension, and mass psychology all contributed. But beneath the supernatural accusations lay something more mundane and more sinister: land disputes. Look at who was accused. Look at who did the accusing. Look at who benefited when the accused were convicted and their property was seized. A pattern emerges. The accused were often people who owned valuable land or had recently inherited property. The accusers were frequently neighbors or relatives with competing claims. The powerful men who ran the trials, the judges, the ministers, the magistrates, had financial interests in the outcomes. This wasn't accidental. It was systematic. And the Turner family was involved. Not Captain John Turner. He had died in 1680, reportedly of a sudden fever. His son, John Turner II, now controlled the House of 7 Gables and the family's shipping business. Turner too was friends with several of the judges overseeing the witch trials. He attended the same church as Cotton Mather, the influential minister who supported the prosecutions. His business dealings connected him to powerful families across Massachusetts. When accusations started flying in 1692, Turner too saw an opportunity. One of his competitors was a merchant named Philip English. English was wealthy, successful, and owned valuable waterfront property that Turner wanted for warehouse expansion. English was accused of witchcraft in April 1692. The accusation came from a teenage servant girl who claimed English's specter had tormented her. This was the logic of the witch trials. Spectral evidence, claims that the accused person's spirit or ghost had appeared and caused harm, was accepted in court. You couldn't defend against spectral evidence. If someone said your ghost attacked them, how could you prove it didn't? English was arrested. So was his wife. They were thrown in jail to await trial. If convicted, they would hang. Their property would be forfeit to the colonial government, which would then auction it off. And Turner was perfectly positioned to bid. But English was smarter than most of the accused. He was wealthy enough to have connections beyond Salem. While imprisoned, he sent messages to allies in Boston. He bribed guards. And one night, he and his wife escaped. They fled to New York, beyond Massachusetts jurisdiction, and stayed there until the trials ended in 1693. They survived. But many of their neighbors did not. Bridget Bishop, the first person hanged in the Salem trials, owned a tavern and land that was quickly claimed by creditors after her execution. Rebecca Nurse, a respected elderly woman, owned farmland that her relatives had disputed. After she was hanged, that land passed to family members who had testified against her. George Jacobs Sr. owned a large farm. He was hanged. His farm was seized and eventually sold to buyers connected to the judges. The pattern is undeniable when you map the property transfers. But here's where the story connects back to the House of Seven Gables. Matthew Maule, the carpenter Turner had displaced to build his mansion, had descendants. His son, Thomas Maule, was a vocal critic of the witch trials. Thomas Maule published a pamphlet in 1695 called Truth Held Forth and Maintained, which condemned the trials as fraudulent and motivated by greed. He explicitly named wealthy merchants who had benefited from accusations against their business rivals. He didn't name Turner directly in the pamphlet. But in Salem, everyone understood the references. Maule was arrested for publishing the pamphlet and tried for sedition. He defended himself in court, arguing that the witch trials had been a cover for land theft and that the prominent families of Salem, including the Turners, had blood on their hands. He was acquitted, barely. The jury hesitated to convict someone for telling truths everyone suspected but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Thomas Maule walked free. But he never forgot what had been done to his family. And he made sure the story was written down. Passed to his children. Preserved as oral history in Salem's working-class families. By the early 1700s, two competing narratives existed about the House of Seven Gables. The official version: Captain Turner built a fine home through hard work and maritime commerce. His descendants were respectable members of Salem's merchant elite. The whispered version: Turner stole land through legal manipulation. His family profited from the witch trials. His house was built on a foundation of theft and blood. And Matthew Maule's curse was real. Strange things began to happen at the house. Chapter 3: The Deaths Begin. John Turner too died in 1712. He was 64 years old. The official cause of death was recorded as apoplexy, what we would now call a stroke. He collapsed in his study in the House of Seven Gables and was dead before morning. Nothing unusual about that. Strokes killed people in the 18th century just as they do now. Except for one detail recorded by the doctor who examined the body: Turner had blood in his mouth and throat. Not from biting his tongue during the stroke. The blood seemed to have come from within, as if he had choked on it. The doctor noted this in his records. He found it medically curious, but not necessarily suspicious. But everyone in Salem remembered Matthew Maule's curse: God will give you blood to drink. Turner's son, John Turner III, inherited the house. He was a successful merchant like his father and grandfather. The family business was thriving. The house was well maintained. Everything seemed normal. Then the children started dying. Turner III had 7 children. Between 1720 and 1735, 5 of them died before reaching adulthood. 2 died of smallpox during an epidemic, not unusual for the time. 1 died in a fall from a horse, tragic but common. 1 drowned in Salem harbor in circumstances that were never fully explained. The boy was an experienced swimmer. The weather was calm. He simply disappeared one afternoon and was found floating near the docks the next morning. The 5th death was the strangest. Turner's eldest daughter, Elizabeth, died at age 19. The official record says she died of a fever. But servants in the house told a different story. They said Elizabeth had become obsessed with the hidden passages in the house. She spent hours exploring them, searching for something. She claimed she heard voices in the walls. Scratching sounds. Footsteps in empty corridors. A few days before her death, she told her mother she had found a room she'd never seen before, a small space hidden behind a false wall in the attic. Inside, she said, were papers. Documents. Things her great-grandfather had hidden. She refused to say what was in those papers. She seemed frightened. Agitated. Then she became ill. Fever. Delirium. She died within a week. After her death, her parents searched for the hidden room she described. They never found it. If it existed, Elizabeth had taken the secret of its location with her. John Turner III began to break down mentally. He became convinced the house was cursed. He told business associates that Matthew Maule's ghost walked the halls at night. He heard knockings in the walls. Saw shadows moving in empty rooms. His wife begged him to leave the house. Sell it. Move somewhere else. He refused. The house was the family legacy. Abandoning it would mean admitting defeat, admitting that a carpenter's curse had destroyed a merchant dynasty. Turner III died in 1738. Cause of death, unknown. He was found dead in his bed one morning. No visible injuries. No apparent illness. He simply stopped breathing sometime during the night. The doctor who examined him noted, once again, traces of blood in the mouth and throat. At this point, 3 generations of Turner men had died the same way. All with blood in their throats. All relatively young. None made it past 65. All while living in the house of 7 Gables. The house passed to Turner III's widow and then to his surviving son, John Turner IV. Turner IV was the last of the direct line. He had no children. He had no real business acumen. The family fortune, which had once been substantial, had dwindled through poor investments and the declining importance of Salem as a trading port. By 1750, Turner IV was land-rich and cash-poor. He owned the house of 7 Gables and surrounding property, but he couldn't afford to maintain it. The house began to decay. Paint peeled. Shutters hung crooked. The roof leaked. The gardens grew wild. Inside, rooms were closed off to save heating costs. Furniture was sold to pay debts. Turner IV lived alone in the deteriorating mansion, rattling around in a house built for a large prosperous family that no longer existed. Servants refused to work there. The local reputation was clear: the house was cursed. The Turner family was doomed. Anyone who spent too much time within those walls risked being dragged down with them. Turner IV tried to sell the property multiple times. No one would buy it. The asking price wasn't the issue. Buyers simply didn't want it. In 1782, John Turner IV died. He was 67 years old and died, like his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, with blood in his throat. The direct Turner line was extinct. The house of 7 Gables sat empty. For the first time in 110 years, no one lived there. No one wanted to live there. Local children dared each other to approach the house at night. Adults crossed to the other side of the street when walking past. Stories multiplied: ghostly lights in the windows, sounds of screaming, cold spots that persisted even in summer. Whether any of this was true or just small-town superstition feeding on itself is impossible to determine. What's documented is this: between 1782 and 1784, 3 different families attempted to move into the house. None stayed longer than a few months. The first family, a merchant and his wife, left after their infant daughter died of unknown causes. The second family, a ship captain with 4 children, abandoned the house after the captain fell from a 3rd-story window. He survived but was permanently injured. He claimed he'd been pushed by hands he couldn't see. The third family, a wealthy widow from Boston, lasted 6 weeks before fleeing. She told friends that doors opened and closed by themselves, that she heard whispering in rooms that were empty, and that she had found blood seeping through floorboards in the second-floor hallway. Carpenters investigated and found nothing. No source for the blood. No leaks. No logical explanation. After 1784, the House of Seven Gables stood vacant for nearly 2 decades. It became Salem's most famous abandoned building. A relic. A cautionary tale. The curse, everyone agreed, was real. And then, in 1801, someone bought it. Someone willing to take the risk. That person would eventually inspire Nathaniel Hawthorne to write the novel that made the house famous. But the real story, what actually happened in those walls, is darker than any fiction. Chapter 4. The Sea Captain's Daughter. Her name was Susanna Ingersoll, and she wasn't afraid of curses. Susanna was born in 1783, the daughter of a Salem sea captain. Her father, Samuel Ingersoll, had made a modest fortune in shipping before retiring. He was practical, skeptical of superstition, and unimpressed by Salem's Gothic tales. When the House of Seven Gables came up for sale in 1801, offered at a price far below its actual value because of its reputation, Samuel saw an opportunity. The house needed work, certainly. But the bones were good. The location was excellent. And the price was unbeatable. He bought it. Susanna was 18 years old when her family moved in. She would live in that house for the next 57 years until her death in 1858. And in those decades, she would uncover things. Susanna was educated, unusual for women of her era. She read Latin. She kept detailed journals. She was curious, methodical, and fearless. Shortly after moving in, she began exploring the house systematically. She measured rooms. She tapped walls looking for hollow spaces. She sketched floor plans. And she found the hidden passages. Not by accident. By logic. The house's dimensions didn't match its visible rooms. There were gaps, spaces that should exist but didn't appear on any floor plan. She started removing panels in areas where she suspected concealment. Behind a closet in a second-floor bedroom, she found a narrow passage that ran between walls to a small chamber near the attic. The chamber contained a desk, a chair, and a locked chest. The lock was rusted through. She forced it open. Inside, papers, ledgers, letters, documents spanning from 1668 to 1712, from Captain John Turner's time through his son's generation. What she found was explosive. Detailed shipping records documenting the family's involvement in the slave trade. Not ambiguous. Not euphemistic. Explicit logs of human cargo, numbers of people transported, prices paid, profits calculated per voyage. Legal documents related to the Maule land dispute. These showed that Turner had indeed used questionable legal tactics and outright bribery of colonial officials to take Maule's property. Letters between Turner II and several judges involved in the Salem witch trials. The letters discussed specific accused individuals and their property. The language was coded, but the meaning was clear. Convictions would lead to property seizures that certain parties could exploit. And strangest of all, a handwritten confession, apparently written by Captain John Turner shortly before his death in 1680. The confession admitted to taking Maule's land unjustly. It expressed fear of divine judgment. It described nightmares Turner had experienced, dreams of choking on blood, of Maule's ghost strangling him. Turner had hidden this confession, presumably unable to make it public, but equally unable to simply destroy it. It was guilt preserved in ink. Susanna read everything. She made notes. She understood she was holding evidence of crimes and moral failures that Salem's prominent families had spent a century trying to forget. What should she do with it? Publishing it would destroy the reputations of several current Salem families, descendants of the judges, the merchants, the men who had profited from the witch trials. It would confirm the darkest rumors about Salem's founding elite. It would also be dangerous. These families were still powerful. They could make her life difficult. They could damage her father's business. They could make her a social pariah. Susanna made a decision that reveals her character. She kept the documents, but she didn't publish them. Not yet. But she didn't destroy them either. Instead, she told the story orally. She became known in Salem as the woman who knew the truth about the House of Seven Gables. She gave informal talks in her parlor to visitors who wanted to hear the real history. And she told the story to her cousin, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Hawthorne visited Susanna regularly in the 1840s. He was a struggling writer, searching for material. The gothic, morally complex tale Susanna told him about the house, the curse, the stolen land, and the family's slow destruction was perfect. In 1851, Hawthorne published The House of the Seven Gables. He changed names. He fictionalized elements. He added romantic plotlines and a redemptive ending that the real history lacked. But the core was true. A powerful family built a mansion on stolen land, prospered through morally questionable means, and suffered a curse that might have been supernatural or might simply have been the inevitable consequences of their own corruption. The novel became hugely popular. It established The House of Seven Gables as an American Gothic landmark. But it also obscured the truth. Most readers assumed the whole story was fiction. The real documents Susanna had found remained hidden. She died in 1858 at age 75. She had never married. She had lived her entire adult life in the supposedly cursed house and died peacefully of old age. No blood in her throat. No sudden death. No mysterious circumstances. Perhaps the curse only affected the Turner bloodline. Or perhaps Susanna's refusal to profit from the house's dark history protected her. After her death, her estate sold the house to a distant relative. It changed hands several more times over the next few decades. Each owner discovered the hidden passages. Some found documents that previous owners had overlooked. Slowly, the full scope of the Turner family's activities became clearer. But the documents Susanna had found, the original cache from the hidden attic room, disappeared. Some believe Susanna destroyed them before she died, deciding the truth was too dangerous to preserve. Others think they're still in the house somewhere, hidden in a space even Susanna never found. The house has been searched repeatedly. Walls have been opened. Floors have been examined. Modern investigators with sophisticated equipment have scanned for hidden chambers. Nothing has been found. But the stories persist. There's still a room in the House of Seven Gables that hasn't been discovered. A space where Captain John Turner hid his darkest secrets. And if someone finds it, what's revealed might finally answer the question that's haunted Salem for 350 years. Was the curse real? Or was it just guilt and consequences dressed up as supernatural vengeance? Chapter 5. The House Becomes a Museum. By 1900, the House of Seven Gables was in trouble again. It had survived 230 years, but survival and preservation aren't the same thing. The building was decaying. The wooden frame was rotting in places. The foundations were settling unevenly. Some of the gables were in danger of collapse. It belonged at that point to a family who couldn't afford the repairs. They used it as a boarding house, subdividing the grand old rooms into cheap rentals for workers and immigrants. Salem itself was changing. The maritime economy that had built the town was dying. The great merchant families had moved away or lost their fortunes. The waterfront was transitional space, warehouses, boarding houses, and poverty. The House of Seven Gables, once the finest address in Salem, was now in one of the worst neighborhoods. Enter Caroline Emerton. Emerton was born in 1866 into one of Salem's old families. She was educated, wealthy, and involved in what was then called settlement work charity efforts aimed at improving conditions for immigrants and the working poor. But Emerton saw something others missed. The house could be saved and made useful simultaneously. Her idea was radical for the time. Turn the House of Seven Gables into a museum, but not just a museum. Use it as the headquarters for a settlement program that would help Salem's immigrant population, providing education, job training, and social services. The historic house would draw tourists. Tourism revenue would fund social programs. The programs would serve the very community that now surrounded the house. It was brilliant. In 1908, Emerton purchased the House of Seven Gables. She hired architects to assess the damage. Their report was grim. The house needed extensive restoration. Some sections were structurally unsound. The original 17th century portions were deteriorating rapidly. Emerton authorized the work but with specific instructions: restore it to match Hawthorne's novel. This is where things get complicated. The house as it existed in 1908 wasn't the house Hawthorne had described. Renovations over 2 centuries had changed the structure. Some gables had been removed. Room configurations had shifted. Architectural features had been updated. Emerton wanted the literary version, not the historical one. So they rebuilt it. Gables that had been removed in the 1800s were reconstructed based on old drawings and descriptions. Rooms were reconfigured to match Hawthorne's floor plan. Details mentioned in the novel, a specific staircase, a particular window, were added even if they had never actually existed. From a historical preservation standpoint, this was controversial. They were creating a simulacrum, a house that looked like what people imagined the House of Seven Gables should look like, based on fiction, not on historical accuracy. But from a practical standpoint, it worked. The restored house opened to tourists in 1910. Visitors could walk through rooms where Hawthorne's characters had supposedly lived. They could climb the secret staircase. They could see the basement well that reputedly had no bottom. Meanwhile, the settlement program was operating in adjacent buildings Emerton had purchased. English classes for immigrants. Job placement services. A community center. All funded by museum admission fees. The model was successful. The House of Seven Gables became one of New England's major tourist attractions. Thousands visited annually. The settlement program helped thousands more. But the restoration had consequences nobody anticipated. By rebuilding the house to match fiction rather than history, Emerton had created something strange, a real building designed to embody an imaginary structure. A place where the boundary between truth and story became deliberately blurred. And strange things began happening almost immediately. Staff reported phenomena the building's previous residents had never mentioned, or hadn't mentioned in ways that were documented. Objects moving overnight. Doors that wouldn't stay latched. Cold spots in rooms that had no drafts. Sounds of footsteps in areas that weren't open to the public. A night watchman quit in 1911 after 3 weeks, claiming he heard voices having conversations in empty rooms. He couldn't make out words, but he was certain, multiple voices, speaking urgently, sometimes arguing. A curator working late one evening in 1915 saw a figure walk past the doorway of the room she was cataloging. She assumed it was another staff member. When she looked into the hallway, no one was there. The building was locked. She was alone. These incidents multiplied over the decades. Most were probably explainable. Old houses creak, temperature differentials create drafts, tired people see shadows that aren't really there. But some incidents were harder to dismiss. In 1923, a group photograph was taken on the main staircase, a publicity photo for a brochure. When developed, the image showed an extra figure. A woman in old-fashioned dress, standing at the top of the stairs, partially transparent. The photographer swore no one had been standing there. The staff members present confirmed it. The figure appeared only in the photograph. The negative was examined by experts. No evidence of double exposure or manipulation. The image was genuine. The camera had captured something the human eye hadn't seen. The photograph was quietly filed away. Emerton didn't want the house promoted as haunted. She wanted it respected as historic and serving a social mission. But word spread anyway. By the 1930s, the House of Seven Gables had two reputations: official historic landmark and unofficial most haunted building in Salem. Emerton died in 1942. Her foundation continued operating the house and the settlement programs. The museum expanded its collections. Professional staff replaced the volunteers. And they began documenting the phenomena more carefully. A logbook was started in 1945, Unusual Incidents. Staff were instructed to record anything they couldn't explain. The logbook, which survives in the house's archives though it's not shown to the public, contains hundreds of entries spanning 75 years. Patterns emerge when you read through them. Activity spikes in October, not surprising given Salem's association with Halloween and the witch trials, but the incidents logged aren't tourist pranks. They're experiences staff have when the building is closed and empty. Certain rooms generate more reports than others. The attic. The basement near the well. A second-floor bedroom that Hawthorne's novel describes as the room where a character dies. And strangest of all, references to the hidden room appear repeatedly, though no hidden room has been officially found since Susanna Ingersoll's discoveries in the 1800s. Multiple staff members, working decades apart, have reported finding a small door or passageway they'd never noticed before, following it to a room they couldn't locate again later. One entry from 1957, written by a curator named Margaret Webb, describes this experience in detail. Working late in the attic, cataloging stored furniture. Noticed a door in the wall that I don't remember seeing before. Old, painted over many times. Opened it. Passage maybe 2 feet wide, very dark. Used my flashlight. Passage extends about 15 feet, then turns. Followed it. Turns again. Opens into a small room, maybe 8 by 8 feet. Empty except for a chair and some papers on the floor. Papers looked very old. Went back to get camera. When I returned, couldn't find the door. Spent an hour searching. It's not there. I know what I saw. I know where I went. But I can't find it now. Webb's report was investigated. The attic was measured. No unaccounted for space existed. The dimensions matched. No room could fit where Webb described. Yet Webb was a professional, rational, respected curator. She had no reason to fabricate the story. And she maintained until her death in 1991 that she had entered that room. Was it hallucination? Exhaustion playing tricks? Or had she actually found one of the house's hidden spaces? Spaces that apparently don't want to be found? The question remained open. But the incidents continued. Chapter 6. The Seances Nobody Talks About. In the 1920s, during the height of the spiritualism movement sweeping America, something happened at the House of Seven Gables that the museum has never publicly acknowledged. The story emerges from private letters, diary entries, and a few cryptic references in local newspapers that careful researchers have pieced together. A wealthy Boston widow named Constance Hartley became obsessed with the house. She had read Hawthorne's novel as a child and visited Salem repeatedly as an adult. She was also a committed spiritualist who believed the dead could communicate with the living. Hartley had resources and connections. Through donations and social pressure, she convinced Caroline Emerton to allow a series of private séances to be conducted in the house after hours. The stated goal was to document psychic phenomena for scientific purposes. The real goal was to contact Matthew Maule, to ask him directly if his curse had been real and if it still affected the house. The séances were conducted between October 1924 and March 1925. 6 sessions total. Each was attended by Hartley, a professional medium named Helen Graveson, several witnesses, and occasionally a reporter or academic observer. Detailed notes were kept. Some survive in private collections. The first séance, held in the parlor, produced nothing remarkable. The medium went into trance, spoke in vague generalities, and claimed to sense troubled spirits, but provided no specifics. The second séance, held in the basement near the well, was different. According to witnesses, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Candles flickered despite no apparent draft. The medium became agitated, speaking rapidly in a voice that observers said didn't sound like her normal speech. She claimed to be speaking for Matthew Maule. The entity speaking through her made specific statements. The house remembers. Wood holds memory. Stone holds memory. Blood soaked into foundation. Cannot be washed away. Turner blood fed these walls. Debt unpaid. Price still owed. Then the medium convulsed and collapsed. She couldn't remember anything from the trance. But she refused to participate in further séances at the house. She told Hartley privately that whatever she had contacted was malevolent and very old. Hartley found another medium. The third séance was held in the attic. This session was shorter. The new medium claimed to contact a different spirit, a young woman who identified herself as Elizabeth Turner, the daughter who had died in the 1730s after discovering hidden papers. The entity speaking through the medium said, "Father hid the proof. Not all was found." She, referring to Susanna Ingersoll, found some but not all. The worst remains hidden. In the room that moves. When asked what the room that moves meant, the entity became agitated and the session ended. The fourth séance attempted to clarify this cryptic message. This time, multiple mediums were present, and the session was held in the second-floor bedroom where Elizabeth Turner had died. What happened next is documented by 3 independent witnesses, a reporter from the Boston Globe, a Harvard psychology professor, and a local minister. All 3 described the same phenomena: rapping sounds in the walls, the smell of wood smoke though no fire was burning, and the sensation of the room becoming smaller, as if the walls were closing in. One witness, the professor, took measurements before and after. He claimed the room had actually shrunk by several inches during the séance, though his measurements were later disputed. Most dramatically, All witnesses reported seeing a dark stain spread across the floorboards near the bed. It appeared to be blood, welling up from between the boards. Samples were collected and sent for analysis. The lab report came back, human blood, but so degraded it was impossible to determine age or origin. Caroline Emerton was informed. She immediately shut down the séance project. No further sessions would be permitted. Hartley was furious. She threatened to go public, to tell newspapers that the house was suppressing evidence of genuine supernatural activity. Emerton made her an offer. The museum would privately investigate the room that moves reference. If they found anything, Hartley would be informed. In exchange, Hartley would keep the séance results confidential. Hartley agreed. A discreet investigation was conducted over the next 2 years. Architects examined the structure. Historians reviewed documents. Staff searched for hidden spaces. They found something. In 1927, workers noticed that a closet on the second floor appeared slightly smaller than the blueprints indicated it should be. When they opened up the wall, they discovered a space, not exactly a room, more like a very large cabinet, that had been sealed. Inside, more documents. These were different from what Susanna Ingersoll had discovered. These were financial records from the early 1700s showing payments to Salem officials and judges during the witch trial period. The payments were carefully documented. Amounts, dates, recipients. It was a ledger of bribery, proof that John Turner II had paid for favorable outcomes in trials that sent people to their deaths and allowed him to profit from seized property. It was exactly the kind of evidence that, if made public, would devastate Salem's reputation and the families descended from those judges. Emerton faced a decision. Publish and confirm the darkest suspicions about Salem's founding families? Or suppress and protect the town's image? She chose suppression. The documents were quietly archived. Hartley was told only that historical records were found and are being preserved. The public never learned what was discovered. Hartley continued visiting the house until her death in 1938. She never publicly discussed the séances. But in her private papers, now housed at the Massachusetts Historical Society, she wrote, "They found something. I know they found something. And they hid it again. Some truths are too dangerous for Salem to face. The curse isn't supernatural. The curse is guilt. And guilt preserved becomes haunting." The séance episode reveals something important. By the 1920s, serious people, educated, wealthy, rational people, believed the house was genuinely haunted or at minimum contained evidence of historical crime significant enough to manifest as paranormal activity. Whether they were right is less important than the fact that the phenomena kept occurring. Something about the House of Seven Gables, its history, its structure, its accumulated associations, made people experience things they couldn't explain. And the museum, for all its educational mission, couldn't fully control the narrative. The house had its own story, and that story kept breaking through. Chapter 7. What really happened to the Turners? Let's step back from the supernatural claims and look at the documented facts about the Turner family's decline. Between 1680 and 1782, roughly a century, 4 generations of Turner men died in circumstances that were unusual but not necessarily supernatural. All died relatively young by the standards of their class. Wealthy men in colonial America who survived childhood typically lived into their 60s or 70s. The Turners rarely made it past 65. All died with blood in their throats, a detail noted by multiple doctors over the decades. Medical historians looking at these cases have proposed several non-supernatural explanations. Hereditary disease. Certain genetic conditions cause internal bleeding that can present as blood in the throat and mouth. Hemophilia. Certain cancers. Vascular disorders. If Captain John Turner carried a genetic predisposition to such a condition, it could have passed through generations, manifesting at similar ages. Environmental poisoning. The house was built using materials common in the 1600s, lead-based paints, mercury compounds in preservation treatments, arsenic in dyes and wallpapers. Chronic low-level poisoning from living in a house saturated with these substances could cause the symptoms documented: sudden illness, blood in the throat, premature death. Lead poisoning specifically causes symptoms that match: cognitive decline, paranoia, hallucinations, and eventually organ failure. If the Turner men spent more time in certain rooms, say, a study where they conducted business, surrounded by lead-painted walls and arsenic-treated papers, they would accumulate higher exposure than other family members. Occupational hazards. The Turners were maritime merchants. They spent time around ships, warehouses, and cargo. Exposure to tropical diseases, toxic substances in cargo, raw chemicals, treated textiles, preserved goods, and poor sanitation in maritime environments could explain their health problems. Stress and lifestyle. Running a shipping empire in colonial America was extraordinarily stressful. Financial risk, legal disputes, dangerous voyages, managing enslaved and indentured workers, all of this created conditions for stress-related illness. Heavy drinking was common among merchants. Poor diet during long sea voyages. Lack of exercise. These factors contributed to cardiovascular disease, which could manifest as stroke-like events with bleeding. Any combination of these factors could explain the Turner family's medical history without invoking a supernatural curse. But that doesn't explain everything. The pattern of deaths aligns too neatly with moments of moral crisis for the family. Captain John Turner died shortly after writing his confession about stealing Maule's land, consumed by guilt. John Turner too died in the decade after the witch trials, when his role in the property seizures was becoming public knowledge. John Turner III died as his children were dying around him, his family literally disappearing. John Turner IV died alone, broke, the last of his line, surrounded by a house he couldn't maintain. The timing suggests psychological factors at minimum. These men were carrying guilt, about how the family fortune was built, about the people harmed, about the growing awareness that their wealth was founded on exploitation and judicial murder. That guilt manifested as physical symptoms. Psychosomatic illness is real. Stress, anxiety, and guilt can literally make you sick. Add in the constant reminders. Matthew Maule's curse was Salem folklore. Everyone knew it. Every time a Turner man felt chest pain or coughed blood, he thought, the curse is real, and I'm next. Belief alone can kill. The nocebo effect, the opposite of placebo, is documented. If you believe you're cursed, if you expect to die, your body can fulfill that expectation through purely psychological mechanisms that trigger physical collapse. So here's what likely happened. Captain John Turner did steal Matthew Maule's land through legal manipulation. Maule did curse him, with a phrase from the Bible that carried real weight in Puritan culture. Turner likely felt genuine guilt. That guilt, combined with possible genetic predisposition to certain illnesses and environmental factors in the house, led to his death. His son inherited not just the house and business, but the guilt and the curse. The psychological burden, combined with his involvement in the witch trials, created conditions for stress-related illness. Each generation inherited this psychological weight. They lived in a house everyone said was cursed. They carried guilt about the family's origins. They experienced stress from trying to maintain wealth built on exploitation. And they died one after another, in ways that confirmed the curse to observers even if the actual mechanisms were medical and psychological rather than supernatural. The curse worked not because Matthew Maule had magical powers, but because everyone believed he did. Belief shaped behavior, behavior shaped outcomes, and outcomes confirmed belief. This is actually darker than supernatural revenge. A ghost you can exorcise. A curse from beyond the grave can theoretically be lifted. But guilt? Psychological trauma encoded in family stories and reinforced by community belief? That can't be easily removed. It persists across generations. It embeds in architecture. It becomes part of how people experience a place. The House of Seven Gables wasn't haunted by Matthew Maule's ghost. It was haunted by the Turner family's guilt, which created a psychological environment toxic enough to literally kill. And that, in a way, is more terrifying than any supernatural explanation. Because it means the curse was always real. Just not in the way anyone thought. Chapter 8. The Hidden Chamber Discovered. Restoration work was being done in the attic of the House of Seven Gables. The building was now 50 years into its life as a museum, and certain structural repairs couldn't be postponed any longer. A construction crew was reinforcing beams when a worker noticed something odd. A section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped but didn't correspond to any known passage or void space. The museum's director at the time, a man named Howard Phillips, authorized careful investigation. They removed panels and found a space, not large, maybe 4 feet by 6 feet, that had been deliberately sealed. Not just closed off, but sealed. The opening had been carefully framed and then covered with multiple layers of wood, plaster, and wallpaper. Someone had wanted this space very well hidden. Inside, they found a small room, exactly as Margaret Webb had described in her 1957 report, though her report was internal and the construction crew wouldn't have known about it. The room contained a desk, a chair, and papers. Lots of papers. The documents were in poor condition, mice had nested in them, moisture had caused damage, but much was still legible. What they found was devastating. Complete financial records from John Turner II's involvement in the Salem witch trials. Not just the bribery ledger that had been found in the 1920s, but correspondence. Letters between Turner and judges. Letters between Turner and accusers. Letters between Turner and other merchants coordinating accusations against business rivals. The documents made it explicitly clear, at least 7 of the witch trial accusations were fabricated or encouraged by merchants who wanted the accused person's property. The letters discussed specific individuals. Perhaps Martha could be encouraged to testify against Good. Philip English's waterfront holdings would be valuable to acquire once he is disposed of. The nurse farm is sizable. Consider who might bring accusations. This was conspiracy to commit judicial murder documented in the conspirator's own handwriting. There were also personal papers from Captain John Turner, diary entries describing his nightmares about Matthew Maule, expressions of fear that divine judgment was coming, and detailed accounts of strange phenomena in the house even in the 1670s. Turner wrote about hearing footsteps in empty rooms, about doors that opened on their own, about feeling watched. He attributed it to demonic influence. He was Puritan, he believed in literal demons. But he also connected it directly to his theft of Maule's land. I am punished nightly for my sin against Matthew Maule. The house I built upon his rightful ground cannot bring me peace. I fear my sons will inherit this curse as surely as they inherit this property. Howard Phillips faced the same dilemma Caroline Emerton had faced in the 1920s, what to do with evidence that would destroy Salem's carefully cultivated image. By 1958, Salem's economy depended partly on tourism. The witch trials were marketed as a historical curiosity, a moment of mass hysteria that enlightened modernity had moved past. Releasing documents proving that the trials were partly a real estate scam orchestrated by the town's wealthiest families would devastate that narrative. It would also implicate families still living in Salem, descendants of those judges and merchants who carried surnames everyone recognized. Phillips consulted with the museum's board. He consulted with the Emerton Foundation. He consulted quietly with some of Salem's prominent families. The decision was unanimous: seal the documents again. But Phillips, to his credit, didn't destroy them. He photographed everything, created a detailed inventory, placed the originals in climate-controlled archival storage with restrictions. Researchers could access them only with board approval, and any publications using the documents would require advance review. This created a strange situation. Historians knew these documents existed. A few scholars had seen them. But publishing from them was so restricted and complicated that most didn't bother. The documents existed in a kind of limbo, preserved but suppressed, available but inaccessible. In 1976, a Harvard graduate student named Ann Morrison was researching the Salem witch trials for her dissertation. She learned about the Turner papers through archival rumors. She applied for access. After months of negotiations, she was allowed to view them under strict conditions: limited time, supervised access, no photocopies, handwritten notes only. She spent 3 days reading the documents. What she found changed her understanding of the witch trials fundamentally. Her dissertation, published in 1978, carefully referenced private papers held in restricted collections, but couldn't quote directly or provide detailed citations. Other historians were frustrated. They wanted to verify her claims, but couldn't access the sources. The museum maintained its position: the documents were too fragile for regular access. Preservation concerns required restrictions. This was partially true. The documents were fragile. But preservation wasn't the only concern. Through the 1980s and 90s, pressure built. Historians argued that documents of this historical importance shouldn't be restricted for non-archival reasons. Descendants of the accused witches, yes, they still existed in Salem, demanded access. They wanted to know exactly what the documents said about their ancestors' murders. In 1992, marking 300 years since the witch trials, the museum partially relented. They published a limited scholarly edition of selected documents with heavy redactions. Names of prominent Salem families were redacted. Specific accusations were summarized rather than quoted directly. The most damning passages, the ones showing premeditation and conspiracy, were paraphrased. It was a compromise that satisfied almost no one. Historians found it academically inadequate. Descendants found it insulting. The museum defended it as balancing historical transparency with community sensitivity. Then, in 2008, something happened that forced the issue. A descendant of Rebecca Nurse, one of the women hanged as a witch, filed a lawsuit demanding full access to the Turner papers. She argued that her family had a right to know exactly what had been said about their ancestor and who had been responsible for her death. The legal argument was novel. Could historical privacy rights trump the public interest in accessing evidence of historical crimes? The case went back and forth for 3 years. Finally, in 2011, a settlement was reached. The museum agreed to digitize the complete Turner papers and make them available to researchers without restrictions, but with a 25-year delay. The digital archive would be released in 2036. Why 2036? The museum argued this gave time for current descendants to process the information privately and for community reconciliation efforts. Critics argued it was a stalling tactic, kicking the can down the road until everyone currently invested in the controversy was dead. So here we are in 2026. 10 years from the scheduled release. The documents exist. They're cataloged. They're digitized. They're sitting in a digital archive waiting for 2036. Unless someone leaks them first. There have been rumors for years that copies exist outside official channels. That researchers who viewed the papers before restrictions made illicit photocopies. That descendants who were shown family-relevant sections kept their own records. If those copies exist, they could emerge at any time. And when they do, whether in 2036 or sooner, Salem will have to reckon with its history in a way it's avoided for 350 years. The House of Seven Gables will be at the center of that reckoning. Because the house didn't just witness history. Its foundations are built from that history. Its timbers hold those secrets. Its hidden rooms literally contain the evidence. The house has always known the truth. Now, eventually, everyone else will too. Chapter 9: Modern Hauntings and Investigations. The House of Seven Gables today operates as a museum, a National Historic Landmark, and one of New England's most visited tourist attractions. It's also, according to numerous paranormal investigators, one of the most actively haunted locations in America. The museum's official position is carefully neutral. Tour guides acknowledge the house's reputation. They mention that some visitors and staff have reported unusual experiences. They don't promote it as haunted, but they don't dismiss the claims either. Unofficially, staff will tell you, yes, something's happening here. In 2008, the Sci-Fi Channel show Ghost Hunters filmed an episode at the House of Seven Gables. The team spent a night investigating with their equipment, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, audio recorders. They captured several anomalies. Temperature drops of 15 to 20 degrees in specific areas with no apparent source. EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Recordings that, when enhanced, appeared to contain voices saying words like Turner and blood and leave. Video footage of what appeared to be a shadow figure moving through the parlor. The episode concluded that the house had compelling evidence of paranormal activity. Skeptics pointed out that old houses naturally have temperature variations, that audio recordings can pick up external sounds that seem like words, and that shadow figures could be tricks of light and camera artifacts. But the investigation raised the house's profile. Interest in paranormal tours increased. The museum began offering special Spirits of the Gables evening tours in October, candlelit walks through the house with emphasis on the spooky stories. These proved so popular that they became a major revenue source. Whatever the truth about ghosts, belief in them was financially beneficial. More investigations followed. Different teams, different equipment, different methodologies. In 2012, a group from the Atlantic Paranormal Society (TAPS) spent multiple nights at the house. They documented over 40 unexplained incidents across their investigation. Most interesting was an incident in the basement near the old well. The well was capped long ago for safety, but it's still there, a deep shaft descending into darkness. The TAPS team set up cameras and audio equipment around it. At 2:47 a.m., all 3 cameras experienced simultaneous interference. The footage shows static and distortion for roughly 30 seconds, then clears. During those 30 seconds, Audio recorders captured what sounds like multiple voices speaking at once. The words are indistinct, but phonetic analysis suggests English spoken in an archaic dialect, consistent with 17th-century pronunciation. When the video cleared, team members reported feeling suddenly nauseous and disoriented. 2 became physically ill. They retreated from the basement and ended that portion of the investigation. One investigator, a man named Jason Hawes, said in a later interview, "I've investigated hundreds of locations. I've experienced things I can't explain. But that basement, something is down there. Something old and angry." The museum reviewed the footage. They couldn't explain the technical interference. All equipment was functioning properly before and after. The simultaneous failure of 3 independent cameras was, according to technical consultants, extremely unlikely unless something caused electromagnetic disruption. But what could cause that kind of disruption in a 340-year-old wooden house with no unusual power sources? Paranormal investigators have a theory: massive trauma or emotional energy can create imprints on a location. The house has witnessed 3 centuries of death, guilt, fear, and suffering. That accumulated energy could, theoretically, manifest as measurable phenomena. Skeptics say this is pseudoscience. There's no proven mechanism by which emotion or trauma becomes electromagnetic energy. The debate continues. But the incidents continue too. Staff